Greetings and salutations, and welcome back to another episode of the Tech Talks Daily podcast. I'm your host, Neil C. Hughes, and today we're going to be diving deep into the world of location APIs, digital entrepreneurship, and the burgeoning tech ecosystem in Estonia with its e-Residency program. And if you're a startup founder or a small business owner, you're going to want to hear more about that. And joining me today are Ian and Luke. They are American expats and serial entrepreneurs, and I had the pleasure of meeting them personally in Tallinn, Estonia, during an e-Residency press event. But both Ian and Luke have a compelling backstory. They've built multiple businesses while working remotely from diverse locations, from Switzerland to South Korea. And these gentlemen are the brains behind Stadia Maps, which is a platform that offers location experiences through interactive street and satellite maps, routing and search features, ultimately making the lives of developers much, much easier. And in this fascinating episode, we'll explore the symbiosis between being an expat, the adventures of Estonia's e-Residency program, and the dynamics of running a location API platform that also values data privacy and customer collaboration. These are two fantastic individuals. When we met in Estonia, just hit it off straight away. It's a real pleasure for me to get them on the podcast today. So I'm here in the UK, but through the wonders of technology, I'm going to beam your ears simultaneously to South Korea and Switzerland, where Luke and Ian are waiting to speak with us today. So a massive warm welcome to the show, guys. We first met in Estonia, but for everyone listening today, can you tell everyone listening a little about who you are and what you do? And Luke, I'll let you kick things off.
Thanks for bringing us on the podcast. I'm Luke. I am from the US originally. I've lived in Switzerland for the past 5 years. And for the past 15 years, I've built companies with technology. I am really excited about the idea that you can take computers all around the world and turn them into something incredibly valuable. And I've had the privilege of being at companies doing that for the last decade.
Awesome. And obviously, I'm in the UK, you're in Switzerland. Ian, you're somewhere completely different. You tell everyone listening a little about you too.
Yeah, so I'm also originally from the US, met Luke in university, and I am calling in today from Seoul, South Korea, where I've lived for the last 6 years. I have a very similar story to Luke. Got into computers as a really young kid and have been working in tech my entire life. I've been self-employed for some definition of self-employed for a good chunk of that time, and have had the privilege of working with Luke for about 10 of those years.
Fantastic. And the reason I wanted to mention your location here is I've got to ask, to set the scene today, how has your experience as American expats working remotely influenced the way you've built Stadia Maps? So can you offer your global perspective? Does it provide any advantages or challenges in your current venture? And maybe introduce everyone listening to what it is as well.
So as Stadia Maps, we're building location APIs for developers, and we're doing this on a global scale. One of the unique advantages of being an expat is that you get to break all these preconceptions that you had. Like, for example, text is written left to right, or the addresses are written in this particular order. There are so many unique problems that you run into in geospatial that are specific to particular locations. And of course, you can break some of these yourself by traveling, by having a customer tell you that you're wrong, or by seeing it firsthand and being able to live that experience is something cool. Another thing I would say that's been a positive as far as being expats is that we're a remote first company. I've actually been working remotely since I was trying to figure out when before getting on the call here. It was actually 2008 was my first job that was fully remote. And since then, I've been more or less remote the entire time. And that's been kind of baked into the DNA of Stadia Maps with three of us now across 3 different continents.
Absolutely love that. And I did mention we met in Estonia, and you guys are actively contributing to and benefiting from the Estonian business ecosystem. And there'll be people listening hearing about that for the first time. So maybe tell me a little bit more about that, and also share how this environment has specifically impacted Stadia Maps' growth, or maybe even strategic direction as a result too.
Sure. So I think the story with Estonia starts like every good story. It started by accident about 6-7 years ago. I was browsing Hacker News, as one does, and discovered this thing called e-Residency from Estonia. Now, to be honest, when I discovered this, I wasn't exactly sure where Estonia was. I kind of had an idea that it was in Europe, but that's about it. And I discovered this program where they were opening up their business ecosystem to entrepreneurs around the world to allow them to create companies in Estonia while living anywhere in the world. Estonia has built a digital ecosystem. All their government services are online. And by giving you an official government ID card, electronic ID card, you get access to these services. And as a result, you get this super streamlined, super efficient, entirely digital entrepreneurial experience, which is something that I had never heard of before. And as a result, I signed up almost immediately. I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do with this. At the time, I was working for a company in Indiana and was like, I'm curious about Europe. I'm curious about, and I want to support this new idea. So why not? Fast forward a couple years, and I'm relocating from the US to Switzerland, and I need a way to continue those business relationships in the US, but also there's quite fun, complicated expat tax problems when you're a US citizen living outside the country. And I saw that by creating a company in Estonia, I could solve a lot of these problems all at once and create a stable base from which I could run my companies and know that I'm always going to have this company in Estonia that can pay my bills. And so we created the company in Estonia, and for a while it was our consulting company. And through this, we've had this one company that's been kind of this stable place we can bill all of our clients, because we originally started out as consultants and have worked with a lot of different clients while building Stadia Maps on the side. Bringing it back to kind of the original question here, what I didn't realize is that in this digital ecosystem, Estonia is also really good at building entrepreneurs. By bringing all these people together from around the world that think a little bit differently, they're willing to establish a company in a country they've never been to, you get a lot of novel ideas, a lot of really amazing thinking from these people. And just by bringing this community together, I have most of the friends I have in the business world that I've really learned from have come through Estonia, whether they're Estonians, which I've met quite a few, or Estonian e-residents that have formed through that community.
And I suspect we've set light bulb moments off to people listening all over the world. And for example, if we've got a startup founder in the US that suddenly thinks, this is a fantastic idea, why has nobody thought about this before? Maybe they have concerns about getting in trouble with the dreaded IRS, etc. I'm curious, have you found the entire experience? And is there anything that or any advice you'd offer to a startup founder that's listening to this anywhere in the world and thinking, should I be doing this? Should I be looking into this in more detail?
Well, I would say the first thing to do is to talk to other e-residents. I actually have a bit of a personal story with this as well that I'll just do really quickly, which is, like Luke was saying, there's so many like-minded entrepreneurs all around the world that are attracted by e-residency. It's this kind of magnet for like-minded people. So I, along with 7 other e-residents, helped to start an association called ERICA, which stands for the Estonian E-Residents International Chamber Association. And you can think of us like a combination between a chamber of commerce and a political representation for e-residents. And our aim is to get basically all of the serious e-residents together in one room who are actually doing business. We have a Discord server. We have community events happening all around the world. And just talking to someone who's from your country is probably the easiest way to figure out what all the pitfalls are. Because as you mentioned, the dreaded 3-letter acronym, the IRS is one of the more complicated tax bodies to deal with. And so if, for example, you're an American, then try and find an American e-resident to talk to, learn from their experience. And then, of course, like, not to sound like a robot or something, but like, yeah, go talk to your tax advisor or other professional help, because most of us are not professional tax advisors, and you probably do need some particularly if you're an American and are looking at this.
And one of the things that really stood out for me for my short time there was, I'm from the UK, you guys are from the US, is how 99% of government services are all online, and doing things like filing taxes takes just minutes. Is that the experience that you guys had as well, as running a company out there?
Absolutely. I don't I have gone to Estonia once for business, absolutely had to go. And that was when we were doing a three-way merger of two of our individual companies and a jointly shared company. We actually merged them all together to simplify our operations, mostly because of the IRS, but for a few other reasons. Everything else is completely online. It's simple. You sign in with a ID card or you use your phone to authenticate, and you just have access to everything. And it's in English. You're not trying to deal with Estonian or any other language. It's all in English. I think Ian has a great story about having to email the tax office in Estonia, and he got perfect service back in English.
Actually, it's even better. I didn't email them. I actually walked in to their office, and I didn't even actually have to do this. I just did this because I'd read a story from another e-resident, Ignacio, online about him doing this, and I thought, that is the most hilarious idea ever. I'm just going to go try this to see if this is legit. So I just walked into the tax office and asked them some random question about how VAT worked or something.
Man, and there's a couple of guys from the US and the UK. This is a completely alien experience, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it really is.
And Ian, you mentioned a moment ago some of the great work you're doing there, trying to get some of those e-residents into the same room. Of course, if you look around that room, what kind of people are in that room? Is it people from all around the world? Or the people
so even in our our core founding group or whatever you want to call it, the charter members, we span from Vancouver to Seoul. So we've got the entire globe covered that way. And the one who's in Vancouver is actually originally from Lebanon. So we have quite a diverse group of people. I would say we're pretty heavy on the tech entrepreneur kind of side. So, I mean, that obviously resonates with this audience. We do also have some, that's kind of the main business case for e-residency that it appeals to is mostly these tech-focused businesses. But we do have some really out there stuff as well. Like Christoph, who's the president currently, he works in children's health insurance, selling in the German market. So completely different, super regulated business and not your classic nomadic tech entrepreneur, which is kind of the image that e-residency has. So we have a pretty wide group of people in the room.
Yeah, and it's worth highlighting that the small nation as well has got a huge percentage of tech unicorns per capita, haven't they, too?
Yeah, it's one of the highest in the world. I don't remember what number it is now, but it's in the top 5.
I think at this point it's 11 or 12 unicorns for 1.3 million people. So not bad.
Yeah, no, they do say you become the average of the people you spend the most of the time around. So if you are a startup founder, I would urge you to check that out. And
not a bad place to visit.
Yeah, and just to bring it back to Stadia Maps for a moment, one of the things that stands out about you guys is this data privacy focus, because you place a significant emphasis on user privacy. And in the context of ever-evolving global data protection regulations, I've got to ask, how are you ensuring compliance without ever compromising on the product's functionality? Because, again, incredibly difficult balance, isn't it?
Yeah, it's definitely a balance. The short answer is that our business model doesn't rely on collecting or exploiting user information. Our customers are businesses, and there's this really old saying that if you're not paying for something, you're not the customer, you're the product. We take that to heart, and businesses especially have that expectation. If you're paying for certain data providers, then they're also collecting all this data on your end users and then using that for advertising, potentially even against you. So think if you're in the restaurant business or something and you start seeing, say you're McDonald's and you see ads for Burger King popping up in the map, these are the kinds of concerns that businesses have. And so we've chosen to take a different approach from most of the industry. We believe that it is possible to build a sustainable business without having to exploit user data. And you mentioned regulatory compliance and all those things. We live in the age of GDPR, which is now GDPR and CCPA. And I think this year there's 5 US states that are launching similar regulations. So this is a coming wave of things. And how do you comply with that? That's a real challenge that most startups are going to have to grapple with. And our answer to that is simply collect as little information as possible. We don't want to collect PII on your users.
And Luke, just to bring to life everything that you do, can you just expand on who your audience is, the people that you serve, and maybe provide a use case just to bring to life what we're talking about here, the value that you guys deliver?
For sure. Stadia Maps serves a global customer base. We've had customers in Europe, in North America, in Asia, and in Australia, really from the beginning. And what we bring is a global product with global data and a global infrastructure that is ready for you to put location in your applications. Now, this could mean a lot of different things depending on what your exact industry is, but it starts with something basic, like you want a map integration. You want your users to be able to see your data on a map. Suppose you were a hotel chain and you wanted your users to be able to find all your hotels on a map. We provide that map that you then add your data to. You can think of our maps as like the canvas, and then your data is the paint that makes it really beautiful. And then when we move beyond maps, we have a lot of other products. Some of them are focused on search. So imagine you're a user on that hotel's website and you want to find the hotels close to Berlin. So you type in Berlin. Someone has to take that input, turn it into where in the world is Berlin. And that's one of our services. It's a service called geocoding. And then suppose you're that same user and you're sitting in, let's say you're sitting in Frankfurt. Yeah. And now you're going to drive from Frankfurt to Berlin, or you're going to take a train. And you need to know, how long is this going to take? What road should I take? What train connection should I take? So now you need a service that we call routing, which is getting you from point A to point B. Now, I've talked a lot about the travel industry, but this also applies to a lot of other industries. Logistics have to solve problems like, we have 100 parcels to deliver. What's the most efficient way to do that? And that can use a product we call optimized routing. We have a really cool customer called Shadow Map, and they actually help people find the sun by using models of where shade is based on buildings and trees and all this. And you can actually find an apartment that's in the ideal situation for having sun in the morning. Let's say you want to see that, or you don't want any sun in the morning, you want to sleep in. So you can find a house that's completely in the shade in the morning, but then in the afternoon you get the sun. So there's really a lot of different products and use cases that you can see coming out of just the same raw location data.
Bring it back to privacy for one more quick use case. If you're in your web browser and you're searching for hotels in Berlin, if you're using some search engine like, I'm not going to pick on Google, but like everyone types into Google. So that you'll see a little map of Berlin probably with hotels put on it. If you're trying to build a search engine that is respecting user privacy, like Brave is doing for their search engine, then they want to minimize the amount of data leakage. That includes things like, I might not be able to see you searched for Berlin, but if I'm a map provider and I can see this IP address requested this particular map tile, which I know is right in the middle of Berlin, then I know that this user happens to be searching for something about Berlin. This is a serious problem. And so one of the things that we've done is we worked with companies like Brave to offer a privacy shield product, which ensures that we can't see this data from your users via using some proxy servers in the middle with their content delivery network. And so we've worked this out as part of our enterprise offering for cases where you need to preserve user privacy even more. So yeah, there's all kinds of things related to privacy. And we think that it's not just a challenge, it's actually a serious opportunity because there are all kinds of use cases that would benefit from enhanced user privacy. And I'm not even going to get into all the other things like, people in risky situations. Like there's the list is endless. I could go on about this all day.
I've learned something here. I'm a Brave browser user myself. I had no idea you guys were involved with that. So that's fantastic. And another thing from meeting you both that really stood out was this partnership-centric model. That seems to be what makes Stadia Maps stand out in this increasingly crowded space of location API platforms. So I've got to ask, what kinds of partnerships have proven most beneficial for your business? Is there anything you can share around some of those?
Yeah. The partnership approach is, I think there's really two sides of this coin. When we look at many companies in the industry, what we saw was a lack of the desire to be anything more than a vendor. And what we've really tried to do is build relationships with our customers in a way that instead of it simply being a vendor-client relationship where maybe you talk once a year when you renegotiate your contract, we actually have a much more integrated discussion, especially at the beginning, to help them succeed at their integration. And that's the first side of it, is with our partners or with our customers, really viewing them as partners and as long-term relationships. We might start today with a very small integration They're not paying us that much money, but we know that as they grow, because we work with a lot of startups, we know that there's always the chance that they're going to explode and really grow quickly. We'll be there for them now when they're getting started, and then in 2 years when they're 100 times the size, we'll still be that same partner that they can rely on. So that's the first side of that partnership coin. And the second side is something I'm really excited about, and that is actually partnering with other companies in geospatial to do things that companies perhaps haven't done before. And we actually have a project that's in the works right now. We've already started talking about it with a design firm called Stamen Design. Stamen, about 10 years ago, well, just to give a little bit more context about what Stamen does, they are a design agency that works with maps and data visualization. They have worked with everyone from the Smithsonian to the New York Times to Meta and Apple. In that context, about 10 years ago, they created a kind of open, freely available map set for developers around the world to use. It's called Stamen Map Tiles. And since then, these maps have become part of basically every open source mapping library. One of the map styles, called Stamen Watercolor, is actually part of Estonian's permanent collection as one of their first digital art pieces. And over the last 6 months, really Stamen over the last year, has realized that providing the service for free was no longer sustainable. Servers cost real money, infrastructure costs real money, and they are mostly a consulting firm as opposed to a services company. And so they wanted to find a way to transition these tiles to something better that's supported. And that's what we do. We create map services that people pay for and get great support and service with. So working directly with Stamen, we have recreated these map tiles from scratch based on a brand new, on kind of best-in-class cartography libraries and processes, and created the brand new Stamen map tiles based on Stadia Maps. And what we've seen here is we've been able to partner with one of the leading cartography companies in the world and create really world-class maps that anyone can use. And it's not simply free or low cost because it's bad quality, but it's actually really good quality. We're going to be continually updating the map data behind these. This was a problem before where the maps, this previous Stamen map files were not being updated. And as you can imagine, after 10 years, that data kind of gets a little stale, but we're going to be continually updating them. We're going to back them with all our standard service guarantees when companies come to us and really need high quality services. And of course, that all comes with Stamen's world-class cartography. And so by making that available to the world, this is where we're getting started. We're taking these map tiles as the first project, but we really see this partnership as something that we can really grow into over the next 2 to 3 years, because imagine what could happen if you take one of the best cartography companies in the world, put it with one of the best map services companies in the world. You really get the best of both worlds, and we can get to focus on what we're good at. They can create really good maps. We can make those really good maps available to everyone. And I'm excited to see where we are in 3 years, 2 or 3 years with this partnership.
And what I love here is I think most people listening will have used a map of some sort on a mobile application and not thought about what goes under the hood, what makes it all possible.
For sure.
And I mean, in your case, if we look under the hood, you'd leverage both OpenStreetMap and other proprietary data sources. So I've got to ask, I mean, how do you manage the complexities of merging open and proprietary data, especially when it comes to ensuring accuracy and reliability? Because to most people using our mobile apps, it all sounds incredibly simple, but it is much more complicated than that, right?
Yeah, it is. So it depends a bit on what kind of service we're talking about. Let's talk about maps first. So with maps, honestly, the quality of the open data is fantastic and it's improving fast. And in many cases, it's even better than the commercially available data sets, particularly in regions like South Korea, where historically the big players have been excluded from collecting their own proprietary data, and they have to go through all these, intermediaries and stuff due to a bunch of regulatory stuff, whereas the open data sets don't have these kinds of restrictions. One of the distinctions I like to actually make, not even just open versus proprietary, though, is the ease of change. So When you get a proprietary data set, it's kind of like baked in, you've got all these licensing considerations. And if there's an error, then it can be kind of difficult to correct if you're depending on a third-party provider for this. Whereas with the open data sets, similar to things like open source software, you have the ability to change it. And not only do you have the ability, it's actually easy and getting easier and easier every year with all, like Meta, for example, has been investing a ton into a web-based OpenStreetMap editor called ID that they've added a mix of data sets that they've been able to license along with some AI tools to help catch inconsistencies. And all of these things contribute to providing a common core data set that's open source that anyone can use, that you can mix up. You can take editorial viewpoints, for example, if you need to show different boundaries based on, say you got customers in some part of the world and they want things to be shown this way. There's all kinds of interesting things that you can do with open data that open data just makes really easy. As you mentioned, there are definitely some complexities when you're trying to merge the two. Anyone who's worked in geospatial will tell you that a lot of the job is building these like ad hoc data processing pipelines, and this is no exception. In proprietary, there's all kinds of different data formats. For example, in live traffic data is one that comes to mind. There are various vendors for live traffic data. That's not something that you're going to get open source. And so in that case, then we would usually try and take a segmented approach. So like we're going to use, say, OpenStreetMap for the road network, and then we're going to use, like Tom for their live traffic data, and then we're going to use some other data source for traffic incidents. And so we have these kind of non-overlapping areas that we've layered in to create a product for the customer's needs using both open source and proprietary data.
And from meeting you, I remember within 5 minutes of talking with you both, we had mentioned the US, Switzerland, Germany, South Korea, Estonia. And it kind of struck me that you were offering this almost world-class support. And I suspect that your mindset of being involved with so many different countries from around the world played a big part in that. And customer support and customer experience is so critical right now. So what unique strategies or indeed technologies are you employing to offer that world-class customer support, particularly when dealing with such a technically complex product?
I would say the killer edge here is just being human. Yeah. We kind of have internal guidelines where we want to respond to emails within a certain period of time, usually within the day. But it's also being willing to listen to a developer's questions. For instance, when you look at geospatial, when you look at maps, they're incredibly complex. We touched on this earlier. Yeah. There's so much data involved. There's so many ideas involved. Like if we started talking about coordinate systems and projections and grids, everyone's eyes glaze over because they're not interesting, but they're actually really important sometimes when you're building a product based on location data. And you take an average developer who's never touched this, they really don't know where to start. And so they have lots of questions. And we found that by answering those questions, by having an email that anyone can find, go to our website and have the links on there, or email us if you have any more questions. We found that we can really answer people's questions up front. Obviously, we get the same question over and over again. We're going to create a tutorial for that. And once we have this foundation of tutorials and we can answer these specific questions, we find that developers succeed with location. And then not only have we helped a customer build something they needed, but we've also left them with a feeling of these guys want us to succeed. And we found that has paid dividends in customers staying with us for years and years. Some of the customers we signed when we first went public with the product are still here, still paying the same amount every month and still succeeding with the same integration that we helped them build 5 years ago.
Absolutely love that. And of course, we're talking today here in 2023, but it's only just a couple of months away from entering 2024. And I've got to ask, are there anything you can share around exciting features or services in your pipeline that maybe will further enhance location experiences that you provide? And how do you also align those with emerging technology trends such as AI or IoT? I appreciate you're probably locked down to NDAs and can't share too much, but is there anything you can share around the road ahead?
In general, we try to actually be pretty open. So yeah, let's talk about a couple of things. Actually, tying back to the theme of open, one of the projects that I'm kind of spearheading is a mobile navigation SDK. So let's get a couple terms out of the way first so we all know what we're talking about. So Luke talked earlier about routing. That's the process of saying, like, I'm in Berlin. I want to get to Hamburg. Okay, how do I get there? I'm using a car. I'm using a bicycle. Okay, I, get some directions and, figure out you're going to have to go this way. So that's routing. Then navigation is the user experience of having something turn by turn. Say you're using, Google Maps or Apple or Waze or whatever you use on your phone. So there is no really good high quality mobile navigation SDK that is open source right now. There exist some older things. There exist some things that are extremely vendor specific. There exist a number of proprietary solutions, which are quite good, but extremely expensive. And it strikes me as kind of funny that everyone is trying to solve the same problem, even all these competitors that are trying to solve basically the exact same problem, particularly when a lot of the core logic is already open source. But it's just created this kind of fragmented ecosystem that makes things really difficult for developers and ultimately, in my mind, reduces the overall size of the pie for everyone who's offering routing services to be able to do in-app navigation. So I'm spearheading an effort to build an open source project that solves these problems. It's going to be first-class citizen on both iOS and Android. It's going to talk about like emerging technology. I don't even know if this is emerging anymore, but at Stadia Maps, we're pretty heavily invested in Rust, which is, it's like for 8 years running, I think, Stack Overflow, this developer website, it's like they're the most loved language, and it's almost become a meme now, how everyone who uses Rust is kind of an evangelist for it. And I definitely kind of fall into that same camp as well. So we're using that for the core as we do for a lot of our backend. And why this is important, not just from like the business side of things, but we also see a lot of interesting things in the future of urban mobility in particular. I think that there's like, not to like, since you're asking for like, future prognostications and stuff, like, I think it's quite possible that we end up in a future where we're not manually driving cars everywhere, where there is a lot more urban green spaces and that kind of thing, more mass transit. And you've also combined that with the emerging like augmented reality, or I think Apple's calling it like extended reality and spatial computing now with their Vision Pro headset, being able to support things like that for use cases. Like, Apple Maps is great and all, but there's always going to be novel use cases in the navigation space. And like, for example, we actually built a custom routing profile for a couple of city governments in the US. There are these senior communities that use golf carts as a primary mode of transportation. And there are specific roads that you're allowed to drive golf carts on and specific ones that you're not. And there's these like, all these weird, like, legal things you have to think about. Like they have a city ordinance that says in this city, you are not allowed to drive on the main road if it is possible for you to go and drive off of one of these like golf cart designated tracks. So all these interesting challenges in navigation. The world's a very complicated place, and we get to see that firsthand from our vantage point living in different parts of the world. And I think that navigation is going to be an interesting part of the future.
Well, on this Daily Tech podcast, I always try and get people thinking differently about how technology is impacting their world. And that example there of golf carts only being able to drive on certain roads, I suspect everyone listening didn't even know that problem existed. So I absolutely love it. And also, Ian, from your backstory there, does this mean you can justify spending $5,000 on a headset for research purposes? Is that going to happen?
I'll need to talk to the CFO about that one.
Oh, I love it. Well, I love chatting with you both today. I always like to end on a light-hearted note. And Ian, we'll start with you here. I always ask my guests to leave either a book that means something to them that we can add to an Amazon wish list, or a song that we can add to a Spotify playlist. So, Ian, for you, I'm going to ask, what would you like to leave everyone listening with and why?
Well, I could tell you to go in, if this is a video podcast, I'm not sure. I could tell you to go and like listen to the entire Anjuna Beats catalog, but I'll try and come up with something a little bit shorter than that. One of the most influential books in my life was Anti-Fragile by Nassim Taleb. You may have also heard of his previous book, Fooled by Randomness. Anti-Fragile, I think, it kind of builds off of that, and that's one of my favorite books of all time. To totally oversimplify it, one of the main premises is that a lot of life and business and a whole lot of other things is dominated by fat tails. And that's one of the reasons why I'm involved in startups, is for that kind of exponential payoff. And the way that it's affected all kinds of things in my life. Like, my philosophy is kind of the same as Taleb's, which is you start with something stable. you build something sustainable. So like in his world coming from finance, it's like you build your portfolio out of like something like US Treasury bonds or gilts or something that are like super stable and are not going to like dramatically go down in value in general. So applying that to business, start with a really solid foundation and building something in a really sustainable way while still having the option for that like 10x, 100x exponential payoff is pretty great. Also influences other decisions in life, like why I live in one of the densest cities in the world, because serendipity occurs a whole lot more often when you can maximize the number of occurrences. So being in a city with like 25 million people and being able to get plugged into that startup ecosystem, going to e-Residency events, all these kinds of things, it's all kind of related, and I highly recommend you check out that book.
Awesome. Love that. I'll get that book added to our Amazon wish list. Also love the angle on serendipity there. Completely agree with you on that. And Luke, there's also a real pressure on everyone, every single person listening, to be in a state of almost continuous learning. So a question I've got to ask you is, where or how do you self-educate? Any tips or advice you can, or even stories you can pass on?
Yeah, Neil, I think that's even more the case in tech. Because the tech world is always changing. When you look at technology over the last 10 years, it's a different world than it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago, and compared to 50 years ago. You have to start all over if you had a career in tech. For me in tech, my self-education really started in high school. I learned that programming was a thing. I learned that you could create value on the internet using tech. So I started learning self-taught. And then when I reached university, every project that we had the option, I would pick a new programming language to use to learn. And sometimes it got me in the worst trouble. I remember one night in university, I had a project due the next day, and I was using Haskell to write a compiler. Why does anyone do that? I don't know. But I was doing that, and I just couldn't figure it out. And I went to my teacher for help, and he's like, I can't help you. I don't know how this works. You chose this language that no one else knows. And I remember I figured it out and I turned it in, and the next morning I realized because I had changed one line, it broke the whole project. And thankfully the teacher allowed me to correct it, and I turned it in a little bit late. But that philosophy is carried through my entire career. It's like, if you don't try new things just because you can, just because you could, then you're not going to keep up in tech. But on the flip side, I've learned that reliable technology that you use the foundation, kind of touching on what Ian said about stability, is you start with the tech you know, and then you add the new cool things on top in things like Rust or some other new idea that allows you to really get the edge over competitors, but also share your knowledge with people around you.
Sound advice indeed. In fact, we've covered a lot today in a short amount of time, from Estonia's e-Residency program to the great work you're doing at Stadia Maps. But for anyone listening that maybe want to carry on this conversation we started today, maybe they want to talk about Stadia Maps, maybe they want to talk about e-Residency, where would you like to point everyone listening to that?
Well, if you want to find Stadia Maps, we're stadiamaps.com, STADIA. And then me personally, if you want to reach out, I'm luke@stadiamaps.com is my email. I'm also on Mastodon, on Hachyderm, and occasionally on Twitter, though not too much on that lately. And LinkedIn, of course.
Yeah, and then likewise, I'm Ian@stadiamaps.com. I'll make sure that my Mastodon link gets in the show notes. That's where I'm most active on social media. You can also find me on LinkedIn. And both Luke and I are actually going to be speaking at conferences over the next couple of months as well. So I'm going to be speaking at the end of November at FOSS4G Asia, talking about this mobile navigation framework. And Luke, you want to tell a little about what you're doing?
Yeah, and I'll be at Bits and Pretzels in Munich in a couple of weeks, and also at State of the Map EU in Antwerp in the middle of November, I believe it is, speaking at both events.
Fantastic. Well, I'll get links added to everything you mentioned so people can find you nice and easily. And I love what you're doing at Stadia Maps, this location API platform for developers that you founded way back in 2017. But I think what brought it to life was your personal stories here and how you've embraced the e-Residency program in Estonia and everything that you've experienced along the way. And I just love how you're experiencing that almost global citizen of the world approach and your backgrounds and where you're living. It's just incredible. And I always say technology works best when it brings people together, and both of you are the epitome of that. So thanks for taking the time to sit down and talk with me again today.
Thank you, Neil.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us. It was a lot of fun.
So a huge thank you to Ian and Luke for giving us such a comprehensive insight into Stadia Maps, the unique blend of challenges and opportunities that come with being digital entrepreneurs, and how they've successfully leveraged Estonia's advanced digital ecosystem and being members of that e-Residency system there. If you want to hear more about that, please message Ian or Luke. They're incredibly helpful. If you want any more information, I have a few contacts there. I'll be able to point you in the right direction. Email me directly, techblogwriter@outlook.com. But my big takeaway from the conversation today is that it's clear that businesses are no longer just about technology. It's about building long-term relationships, preserving user privacy, constantly innovating. And in a world obsessed with data monetization, for me, Stadia Maps stands out by choosing to focus on the ethical use of data and that commitment to world-class customer support. And don't forget, Ian did recommend the book Anti-Fragile by Nassim Taleb. I'll be getting that added to the Amazon wish list, so I'm going to be checking that out as well. And remember to reach out to me on the socials, just at Neil C. Hughes. I'm nice and easy to find there. And my website is techblogwriter.co.uk if you'd like to work with me. But that's it for today. So stay tuned for more enlightening discussions that will hopefully demystify complex technology and showcase their real-world applications. Hopefully you'll join me again tomorrow, but thank you for listening today, and until next time, don't be a stranger.